Hey guys, tonight we're stepping quietly into the oldest libraries on Earth. The first flickering sparks of human memory carefully pressed into clay and tucked beneath the soft light of oil lamps. You're gonna walk among the shadows of places where writing itself was still an experiment, where a handful of people tried to make thought permanent. And honestly, you probably wouldn't survive the smell. Smoke, dust, and hot oil in a windowless room somewhere between the Tigris and Euphrates. Still, it's a beautiful idea. A civilization realizing that memory can be stored outside the mind. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing at the edge of an ancient city, not one that survives on any modern map, but one that breathes faintly under layers of sand and silence. Somewhere in southern Mesopotamia, about 5,000 years ago, torches flicker along mud brick walls. The air smells like baked earth after a long day of sun. You're standing near a small temple complex where priests, accountants, and early scribes are experimenting with a miracle: writing. They don't think of it as art or history yet. It's more like paperwork, which, ironically, will become the backbone of civilization. You watch as a young apprentice, probably half asleep himself, kneads a lump of damp clay. He takes a sharpened reed and presses tiny wedge-shaped marks into it, the birth of cuneiform. These marks record barley rations, debts, and temple donations. It's not glamorous, but it's knowledge preserved in one of the most durable forms ever made. 5,000 years later, those tablets will still whisper when the wind uncovers them. The ink in your favorite paperback can't say the same. At first, the libraries of this world aren't libraries at all. They're storerooms filled with rows of clay tablets, inventories of sheep, beer, and bureaucratic boredom. But over centuries, as scribes begin to copy myths and hymns alongside receipts, these storage rooms become something greater. They become places of preservation, humanity's first external hard drives. You stroll through one of these early archives, and you realize how tactile everything is. There's no bookshelf. Instead, tablets are stacked like bricks or laid flat in baskets. The script feels alien, but the impulse behind it is familiar. People wanting to keep track of what matters. The very first librarians might not have worn cardigans, but they definitely worried about misplacing things. In one Sumerian text, a scribe complains that the tablet is missing from its proper shelf. Bureaucratic frustration, it seems, is as old as writing itself. The mainstream historical fact here is simple but astonishing. Around 2600 BCE, in the city of Uruk, some of the earliest known archives were created to store thousands of administrative tablets. They were maintained by scribes who worked within temple complexes, arguably the first record keepers and curators in human history. But there's also a fringe tidbit historians still smile about. Some tablets from later periods appear to contain what we might call practice scribbles, doodles, test marks, even early grammar lessons. The world's first homework, preserved forever in clay. Somewhere, an ancient student probably groaned just like you did. Historians still argue whether these early collections should really be called libraries, or more accurately, archives. After all, they weren't open to the public, and most of the material dealt with accounting rather than poetry. But does it matter? Knowledge is still being kept safe, and the impulse to hold on to what we know has already taken root. As the night deepens, you wander past rooms filled with quiet scribes bent over tables. The only sounds are the soft squish of clay, the scratching of reeds, and the occasional yawn. You can almost feel the rhythm of their work. Mark, breathe, mark, breathe. They're creating a heartbeat for civilization. Each tablet, small and heavy, is a vessel of information that will outlast its maker by millennia.
Somewhere nearby, a cat wanders between the workers, unbothered by history in the making.
You pause to notice something. The firelight dances on the walls, and the shadows seem to move in time with the flickering lamps. These lamps, fueled by sesame oil, emit just enough light to work by, but fill the room with smoke. Your eyes sting, and your thoughts wander. Maybe this is why so many scribes wrote short sentences, the first form of workplace efficiency. As you step outside for air, the cool night greets you. Above, the stars spread wide and clear, the same constellations you see today. Somewhere out there is the Milky Way, and you can almost imagine these ancient record keepers gazing up at it and wondering if their stories will ever reach the heavens. In a way, they do. Every archaeologist who uncovers a tablet becomes part of that same story, decoding whispers left by people who feared forgetting. You wander down a narrow alley toward another building, smaller, humbler. Inside, a different kind of record lies waiting. Here, clay tablets aren't stacked neatly, but scattered across the floor, some cracked, others half buried in dust. This is what happens when time forgets. Libraries crumble, roofs collapse, and rain seeps in. Yet somehow, the clay endures. Fire can destroy papyrus, but it bakes clay even harder. The paradox of preservation. Sometimes, catastrophe helps memory survive. You pick up one of these ancient tablets and tilt it toward the moonlight. The wedges form patterns, rows, tiny grooves. It's mesmerizing. Not just the marks, but the human need behind them. The same need that fills your phone's photo gallery or your cloud storage. Proof that you were here, that you remembered something worth keeping. Somewhere behind you, a priest calls out to extinguish the lamps. Work is done for the night. The scribes wipe their hands, stretch their backs, and leave the tablets to dry. Tomorrow they'll return, and the quiet continuation of memory will begin again. You walk away through the dark streets of Uruk. Around you, the city hums faintly. A distant drum, the crackle of fire, the murmur of wind over rooftops. Civilization is still young, uncertain of itself, but already learning that memory can be made physical. You pass a wall etched with symbols, the earliest attempt at signage. Maybe an address, maybe graffiti. Even that is a form of preservation, a small rebellion against forgetting. As you head back toward the river, the lamps fade one by one, until only the stars remain. The reflection of the moon dances on the water. Somewhere beneath your feet lie thousands of clay fragments, buried and waiting to speak again. And you realize? The first libraries weren't quiet because of rules. They were quiet because everyone was listening to the birth of time itself. You wake again in that same desert dawn, a thin veil of mist hugging the riverbanks of the Euphrates. The sun rises sluggishly, painting the mud brick rooftops in gold. Somewhere nearby, a rooster yells like it has an appointment with destiny, and the city stirs to life. You stretch, shake the sand from your hair, and make your way toward the quiet heart of knowledge, a low, rectangular building that smells of wet clay and reed smoke. This is no marble temple, no palace of scrolls. It's simple, even crude. Walls of baked brick, a roof of palm beams, and small rooms where the air stays mercifully cool. Inside, rows of shelves, or what pass for shelves, hold clay tablets, stacked edge to edge, heavy and brown. You run your fingers over one, feeling the faint texture of centuries. These are the shelves of clay and reed, the earliest record-keeping systems humanity ever devised. You duck beneath a low doorway and enter a room full of scribes. They're already hard at work, pressing their styluses into soft tablets. Each reed stylus is cut at an angle, leaving wedge-shaped impressions when pressed, the origin of cuneiform. The word itself, from Latin cuneus, means wedge. You imagine how many fingers were cramped, how many wrists stiffened in the name of bureaucracy.
Everywhere you look, there are tablets, piled on benches, drying on shelves, stored in jars. Some are about as big as a bar of soap. Others could knock out a donkey if dropped. The scribes whisper measurements and names. 1 mina of silver, 3 shekels of barley, 5 goats returned. Not the most thrilling reading material, but every one of these tiny slabs adds up to something monumental, the organization of a civilization. Without these records, cities couldn't feed their people, priests couldn't count their offerings, and kings couldn't tax anything that moved. Bureaucracy, it turns out, is humanity's first superpower.
The mainstream historical fact here, the oldest known catalog library at Ebla in modern Syria, dates to around 2500 BCE. Archaeologists found over 17,000 clay tablets there, carefully arranged by subject. Yes, even in the Bronze Age, someone decided there needed to be a system. These tablets covered diplomacy, trade, astronomy, and mythology. A clay internet minus the cat videos.
But here's a quirky little tidbit. Many of these tablets weren't just flat. Some were shaped like small pillows, and others were triangular, meant to be sealed inside larger clay envelopes. Yes, ancient Mesopotamia invented the double file. 1 copy for you, 1 sealed in case you lost the first. Each envelope could even be opened by breaking it apart. Somewhere, an ancient auditor probably sighed in relief that the receipts still matched.
You crouch down beside a scribe. His hands move quickly, almost rhythmically. Press, lift, press, twist. He's not thinking about the future. To him, this is just the day's work. But you can sense the enormity of what's happening. Every wedge he presses creates a permanent thought. If you were to time travel 5 millennia forward, someone might find this very tablet, brush off the dust, and read his words aloud again. That's immortality by clay.
He looks up, squinting at you. His eyes are lined, tired, but his expression is proud. You gesture to the shelves, rows upon rows of identical tablets. How do they ever find anything? He grins and gestures towards small clay labels attached with string or placed beside stacks. Primitive tags. Some even have short summaries. Grain records, Temple of Nana, year of the Great Flood. You can almost imagine the first librarian muttering under his breath, "I told them to alphabetize." Historians still argue whether the scribes of Mesopotamia viewed their work as sacred or purely administrative. Some inscriptions call them servants of the gods, others servants of the palace. But maybe it doesn't matter. They were servants of memory itself. And in a way, every list, every receipt, every myth carved into clay served the same deity, time. The room grows hotter as the morning wears on. Outside, the city hums. Traders shouting, donkeys braying, pots clattering. Inside, it's quiet, but for the steady percussion of reeds on clay. You can hear the heartbeat of civilization in those small, deliberate sounds. One scribe sneezes into his elbow, a nice reminder that even the keepers of wisdom are still human. In the corner, a young apprentice works on something unusual. His tablet isn't filled with numbers, but with symbols that seem to form a story. You lean closer. It's a fragment of what will later be known as the Epic of Gilgamesh. The boy's teacher frowns, but doesn't stop him. Maybe, just maybe, that indulgence allows one of the world's first literary masterpieces to survive. Sometimes, boredom creates art. You step back, feeling the heat of the day pressing in. The air shimmers. Somewhere above, pigeons gather on the roof beams. You imagine the smell of drying clay, earthy and dense, like rain hitting dust. When the tablets are ready, they'll be placed in the sun or baked in kilns, hardening them forever. Fire, in this case, doesn't destroy, it protects. Ironically, some of the best preserved tablets we have today owe their survival to ancient fires that accidentally baked them solid. As you move to another chamber, you notice something even more sophisticated. Lists of gods, omens, and astronomical observations. Here, the scribes are trying to map not just trade, but the cosmos. They record eclipses, planetary motions, and dreams interpreted by priests. You realize this library isn't just a storehouse, it's a laboratory of thought. Every clay slab is a hypothesis about how the world works. A small detail catches your eye, a cracked tablet with an imprint of a cat's paw across its surface. You can't help but smile. It's a tiny relic of domestic chaos, proof that even in ancient Sumer, cats did whatever they pleased. Archaeologists love this sort of thing. It's a whisper from daily life, preserved by accident. Imagine explaining to the temple librarian that your research tablet got edited by a cat. You run your hand along a stack of tablets, each one rough and cool to the touch. The reed styluses lie scattered on the floor, some worn down to splinters. You picture how many reeds were cut along the riverbanks, how many hands blistered from carving knowledge into clay. The process is slow, deliberate, and deeply human. Every symbol is both art and administration. You leave the archive and step into the sunlight again. Around you, canals glint like threads of glass, and the city thrums with movement. The smell of bread, smoke, and animal dung blends into something oddly comforting. You glance back at the small library behind you, unimpressive by modern standards, yet monumental in meaning. Those stacks of tablets are the DNA of civilization. Without them, history itself would be silent. No laws, no myths, no taxes, though you might not miss that part. But also no sense of continuity. The clay shelves of Mesopotamia are where humanity first realized that memory could survive its maker. It's humbling and just a bit eerie to think that the words pressed there still exist, waiting patiently for eyes that will never belong to their authors. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows across the street. You hear laughter from the market, the call of a boatman on the river. The world keeps moving, but inside those quiet rooms, time is frozen in wedges and lines. Somewhere, a scribe sets down his stylus, rubs his eyes, and stretches. Another takes his place. The rhythm continues, as steady as the flow of the river outside. And as you walk toward that river, the sound of reeds scraping clay lingers behind you, soft and persistent, a heartbeat echoing across 5,000 years. The world may have changed, but the desire to record, to remember, to preserve, that remains. You can almost feel the weight of a tablet in your hands, cool and solid, like holding a piece of thought itself. You wake to a different kind of heat, dry, shimmering, and heavy with the sand of sand and salt. The world has changed around you. The reeds and riverbanks of Mesopotamia are gone, replaced by golden desert and a slow, lazy wind that hums through limestone corridors. You're in Egypt now, a civilization that built not only monuments to the gods, but monuments to memory itself. The light is brighter here, almost blinding. You squint as you walk along the edge of the Nile, its surface shining like polished metal. On the far bank, men haul bundles of papyrus reeds, each stalk thick and fibrous. You can smell the green sweetness of the cut stems. These humble plants, will become the pages of the ancient world. Clay was too heavy, too slow. The Egyptians wanted something lighter, smoother, something that could be rolled and stacked and tucked away in secret chambers. You follow the workers to a shaded courtyard where the reeds are stripped, pressed, and soaked. Thin layers are laid crosswise, pounded together until they fuse into a single sheet. The sound of mallets echoes softly, thud, 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 like a heartbeat. The sheets dry in the sun, curling slightly at the edges. When finished, they'll be polished with shells until smooth enough to take ink. You run your fingers over one, warm, faintly sticky, and smelling faintly of river mud. It feels alive. Inside the temple nearby, scribes sit at long wooden tables, each one with a narrow reed brush and a small pot of black ink. You watch as they work, quick strokes, graceful curves. The writing flows from right to left, neat as a line of ants. This is hieratic, the cursive script of Egypt's scholars, simpler than the grand hieroglyphs carved into tombs. These are the quiet words, the ones meant for reading, not worship. The place hums with focus. You can hear the flutter of papyrus scrolls being unrolled, the occasional cough, and the low murmur of prayer. Somewhere, water drips steadily from a cracked jar. The air smells of ink, dust, and faint perfume from a nearby brazier. It's not grand like the great library of later centuries. This is something older, humbler, and more secretive. The Egyptians called such places per Ankh, houses of life. The mainstream historical fact here, the House of Life, was a real institution, attached to temples across Egypt, where scribes copied medical, astronomical, and religious texts. These were both libraries and schools, preserving centuries of accumulated knowledge. Some were as old as 2600 BCE. You're standing in one of the first truly systematic repositories of human learning. You glance over the shoulders of a few scribes. One scroll lists treatments for headaches, another for snake bites. The ingredients are creative. Crocodile dung mixed with honey, one line reads. You blink. Maybe skip that one next time. A quirky little historical tidbit for you. Archaeologists have found actual papyrus scrolls detailing Egyptian contraceptive recipes. And yes, crocodile dung was involved. Sometimes ancient medicine was more brave than effective. Historians still argue whether these houses of life were open to non-priests or strictly reserved for temple scholars. Some argue they were private sanctuaries. Others think they doubled as teaching centers for elite scribes. The truth may lie somewhere in between. Either way, you can feel the reverence in the air. Every scroll treated as both tool and relic. You step deeper into the temple complex. The walls are cool under your fingertips, carved with faint hieroglyphs that shimmer when the torchlight dances across them. You hear chanting in a nearby chamber, low, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. The librarian priests believe that words themselves have divine energy, that reading aloud renews the world. You wonder how many generations of scribes whispered the same lines, their voices overlapping across centuries. You pause by a table stacked high with scrolls. The edges are uneven, curled and brown, yet still intact. A scribe carefully rubs a mixture of gum and water along a frayed edge to preserve it. You realize that this is one of humanity's first preservation techniques: glue and patience. Knowledge doesn't survive by accident, it survives through care. You watch as the head librarian, a calm, older man with eyes like warm stone, carefully ties a red cord around a finished scroll. He places a clay seal on the knot and presses it with a signet ring bearing the temple's emblem. You can almost feel the weight of meaning in that gesture. Each scroll sealed here isn't just a record, it's a promise to the future. Nearby, a younger scribe copies a passage from the Book of the Dead. His brush glides like a whisper. To speak the name of the dead is to make them live again. You realize how literal that is in a place like this. The Egyptians weren't just writing for the living, they were writing to keep the past breathing. Every name, every charm, every recipe for the afterlife, all of it meant to resist forgetting. As you wander between the rows of shelves, you notice something strange. The air feels heavier here, as though the room itself remembers. The scent of old papyrus is thick and slightly sweet, mingled with resin and oil. The scrolls are stored in cylindrical jars, labeled with tiny brushstrokes of red and black. Some are wrapped in linen, like miniature mummies. You can't help but smile at the irony. Mummified words, waiting to be reborn. You take a seat beside a low table where a scribe pauses to stretch his cramped fingers. He smiles at you, weary but kind, and offers a small joke.
The gods gave us hands for writing and curses for when the ink spills. You laugh softly, the sound swallowed by stone. Even here, in the solemn halls of preservation, a little sarcasm survives. Outside, the midday sun blazes white. Inside, the world of ink and fiber remains cool, steady, timeless. A student brings a fresh batch of papyrus, his arms full. Another carries jars of ink, black from soot, red from ochre. The room smells briefly metallic, like rain on hot stone. You feel like you could sit here for hours, listening to the quiet hum of minds at work. A papyrus slips from a stack, unrolling slightly. You catch a glimpse of a map, a delicate drawing of the Nile, annotated with place names. It's one of the earliest known attempts at cartography. You trace the lines with your eyes, marveling at how they resemble the maps you use today. Different tools, same impulse. To understand the world, to hold it steady on paper, to keep it from drifting away. As the day wanes, the scribes gather their scrolls and seal the jars. The high priest enters and offers a short prayer to Thoth, the god of writing. You recognize the name, ibis-headed, keeper of wisdom. The ceremony is short but graceful, a moment of silence broken only by the rustle of linen robes. You realize something. For the Egyptians, writing wasn't just memory, it was magic. To record was to give form to thought, to shape the invisible. You linger in the doorway, the golden light of dusk spilling across the floor. The river glows outside, a slow-moving ribbon of fire. You look back once more at the shelves. Thousands of years of knowledge bound in reeds and ink. Somewhere in those jars lies everything from astronomy to farming to spells for eternal life. A soft breeze stirs the edge of a scroll, fluttering it open for a heartbeat before it closes again. You watch the movement, delicate as breath. The sound it makes is quiet, like the faintest whisper of paper, or perhaps the sigh of time itself, turning a page. You step back into the desert evening, your sandals crunching against stone. Behind you, the temple fades into shadow, but its heartbeat lingers. You can almost imagine the wind carrying tiny flecks of papyrus dust through the night, fragments of forgotten wisdom, still floating, still waiting to be read. The air is different tonight, thicker, smokier, touched by the faint tang of burning pitch. You're standing on the banks of the Tigris, but the city around you is not the sleepy sprawl of Uruk anymore. Its streets are wide and paved with stone, its walls tall and shining under torchlight. The banners of a great empire ripple in the evening wind. You are in Nineveh, capital of the Assyrian Empire, home to the most ambitious library of the ancient world. You move through the city's gates, past guards wearing bronze helmets that gleam like small suns. The streets are alive, merchants closing their stalls, scribes hurrying with sealed tablets, and children chasing each other between carts. The smell of roasted grain and oil drifts from a nearby courtyard. But above it all rises the palace of King Ashurbanipal, its terraces glowing with firelight, its walls etched with lions and winged guardians. Somewhere inside that palace lies the dream of one man, to gather all knowledge under one roof. You climb the grand steps, your sandals whispering against smooth stone. The palace corridors stretch long and echoing, the air cool and perfumed with cedar. You pass mural after mural, scenes of conquest, feasts, and gods, until at last you reach a wide chamber lined with shelves. Not wooden ones, but rows of niches carved directly into the walls. Each holds clay tablets, stacked neatly in rows like loaves of bread. This is the library of Ashurbanipal, the pride of the Assyrian world. You pause in awe. There are thousands of tablets here, perhaps 30,000. The scent of baked earth fills the air, warm and faintly metallic. Lamps flicker against the walls, their light dancing across cuneiform marks that shimmer like tiny constellations. You pick one up. It's heavier than it looks, its edges sharp, its surface covered in neat, compact writing. The king's name is pressed into the corner, a signature of authority. Property of Ashurbanipal, king of the world, king of Assyria. The man knew how to brand. The mainstream historical fact here, this library, built in the 7th century BCE, was one of the largest and most advanced of its time. Ashurbanipal, unlike most kings, could read and write himself. He wasn't content with just ruling, he wanted to understand. His scribes copied works from across Mesopotamia, hymns, myths, medical texts, astronomical records, and even lists of synonyms for training future scribes. It was, in many ways, the prototype of every research library that would come after. You wander deeper. The chamber opens into a maze of smaller rooms, each lined with tablets. Some are categorized by topic, omens, incantations, rituals. Others hold correspondence from governors and scholars. You can almost see the organization system at work, the world's first metadata. On some shelves, clay labels mark entire collections, a library card catalog written before cards even existed. You find a tablet cracked in half, its writing faded but still legible. The lines sound strangely familiar. It's a fragment of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the very same story that began in those humble clay rooms centuries before. Here, though, it's complete, 12 tablets long, carefully copied and preserved. You read the first few lines. He who saw the deep, the country's foundation. The words hum faintly in your mind, echoing across time. The boy who once practiced in Sumer has become a legend in Ashurbanipal's collection. Memory has come full circle. A scholar passes by, arms full of tablets. He's muttering to himself, something about omens and eclipses. He doesn't notice you, too deep in thought. You follow him to a corner where others work, each carefully copying texts from older tablets. It's a meticulous process. Brush the surface, study the marks, then press new ones into soft clay. The air smells faintly of damp earth and sweat. The only sound is the soft click of styluses. You crouch beside one scribe, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a steady hand. His tablet details a list of ailments and cures. For the pain of the head, he murmurs, mix oil with crushed willow bark. You blink, that's the same active ingredient as aspirin. A tiny, unexpected link between past and present. The fringe tidbit? In one Assyrian tablet, archaeologists found a recipe for what may be the first recorded hangover cure. Crush bird beak and myrrh, dissolve in beer, and recite the words of Ninkasi. Historians still debate whether the incantation or the beer was the real cure. You smile and move on, running your fingers along the spines of tablets, smooth, rough, broken. Each one is a voice, trapped in clay. The room feels alive, humming softly with knowledge. Yet you can sense the fragility beneath the grandeur. Clay may endure, but empires don't. Historians still argue whether Ashurbanipal truly intended his library as a public institution or simply a royal archive for the gods and his own glory. Some call him a scholar king, others a collector with divine delusions. But the result is the same. His obsession saved thousands of texts that would have vanished forever. Sometimes, ego serves eternity. You wander into a quieter chamber, smaller and darker. The torches burn lower here. The tablets are older, rougher, their marks deeper and less precise. These are the ancestors of the king's collection, relics from Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon. One bears a prayer to a god whose name no one remembers. Another, a list of stars rising over the horizon. You can feel time layering on itself, each civilization borrowing from the last, rewriting, reinterpreting. A gust of wind sneaks in through a crack in the wall. The flame of a lamp flickers,
and for a moment, the shadows ripple like living things. You imagine all the knowledge contained here, the myths, the laws, the dreams, and wonder how long it can last. Already the empire trembles at its edges. War whispers across the hills. You know what history holds. One day, the palace will burn.
And yet, in that destruction, preservation. When Nineveh finally falls in 612 BCE, the fires that sweep through this place will bake the tablets harder, turning them into stone. Centuries later, when archaeologists uncover the ruins, they'll find Ashurbanipal's dream almost perfectly intact. Fire, once again, becomes the reluctant librarian of time. You pause by a broken tablet lying near the door. The words on it are faint but clear enough to read. May the wisdom of the ancients never perish. You trace the grooves with your fingertip, the clay cool and unyielding. You whisper the line aloud, and for a brief moment, it feels like a prayer that still works. Outside, the night deepens. The city glows faintly beneath the stars. Somewhere, soldiers march, and a distant drum beats like thunder. Inside the library, the air is still. The scribes keep working, unaware that their labor will soon outlive them all. You glance back one last time before stepping out into the corridor. The lamps flicker. The shelves cast long shadows. And you realize that the library isn't just preserving knowledge, it's preserving voices. Every wedge, every mark is someone saying, I was here. I knew something. Remember me. You walk down the palace steps. The stone warm beneath your feet. The Tigris glimmers below, black and silent. Behind you, the library breathes in the dark. It's thousands of tablets waiting patiently for the next reader, even if that reader won't arrive for 25 centuries. The night sky presses down like an iron lid. The stars faint behind a veil of smoke. You feel it before you see it, the low, rolling heat of fire. A library burns. The air tastes of ash and clay dust. Somewhere nearby, voices shout in a language already half forgotten. You stumble forward through the haze, past crumbling walls and shattered statues, the acrid sting of destruction thick in your throat. You are no longer in Nineveh's bright halls. You're standing in the aftermath of everything you just saw, the world where knowledge is always one spark away from silence. Fires, floods, and forgetfulness, the three horsemen of intellectual extinction. You cough, blinking through the smoke, and glimpse a corner of a tablet shelf still standing, its clay books glowing red from the heat. You want to save them, to scoop them up, but the heat drives you back. The irony burns sharper than the fire itself. Centuries of memory erased in an hour. It's not just Nineveh. Every great storehouse of knowledge, every proud archive of human thought has lived under the same quiet threat. Time, carelessness, war, weather, none of them discriminate. Knowledge doesn't vanish because someone wants it gone most of the time. It disappears because someone forgot to care. You step out into the open, where the night wind sweeps ashes into the dark. You imagine the priests of Egypt weeping as papyrus scrolls crumble under damp, or the librarians of Babylon watching the floodwaters of the Euphrates rise, carrying their records downstream. You can almost hear the splash of clay tablets tumbling into the river, a terrible, soggy applause. The mainstream historical fact here, across the ancient world, disasters routinely destroyed libraries and archives. Floods devastated the clay archives of Babylon and Ur. Fires consumed countless scrolls in Alexandria. Even neglect played its part. Papyrus rotted if not carefully stored, and clay tablets disintegrated under pressure or humidity. Knowledge didn't die all at once. It eroded slowly, like sand slipping through fingers. A soft drizzle begins to fall, that rare, heavy desert rain that feels like an omen. You watch droplets hiss on the cooling embers, steam rising like ghosts. The smell of burnt earth mixes with wet stone. Somewhere beneath your feet, 1,000 baked fragments lie buried. The storm doesn't know it, but it's sealing them for eternity. You kneel and pick up a half-melted tablet. The edges have fused, the writing is warped, but the impression of symbols remains. Fire destroyed it, but also preserved it. The paradox again, catastrophe as curator. It's like the universe can't decide whether it loves or hates our stories. You begin walking through time again, each step taking you centuries forward. The fires fade, replaced by rain, by silence, by neglect. You see temples crumble, roofs cave in, rooms filling slowly with sand. The libraries of the ancient world become tombs. No guards, no readers, no light. Only the slow, patient work of decay. In one ruined hall, a family of foxes has made their den inside the shell of a library. You watch a cub curl up beside a cracked jar of papyrus scrolls. It's oddly peaceful. Maybe knowledge doesn't need to be read to be remembered. Maybe it just needs to exist. You think of the stories whispered about the great library of Alexandria, the most famous symbol of loss in all of history. Historians still argue whether it was burned by Julius Caesar, destroyed under the Romans, or eroded piece by piece over centuries. The truth, as usual, is probably less cinematic and more tragic. Neglect, bureaucracy, and human indifference. But the image endures. Shelves of papyrus going up in flames, scholars watching helplessly as their life's work curls into smoke. Here's your quirky tidbit. Ancient writers like Plutarch claimed that when Caesar's troops set fire to ships in Alexandria's harbor, the flames leapt inland and accidentally consumed the library scrolls. Whether true or not, it's a perfect metaphor for civilization. Sometimes our greatest losses happen by accident while aiming for something else entirely. Historians still debate how many works were lost. Tens of thousands, maybe hundreds. Plays, poems, philosophies, gone. There's something deeply human in that kind of disappearance, though. We forget, we rebuild, we forget again. Maybe it's our version of renewal. Like the Nile's floods, destruction clears space for something new. You step through another ruin, this one quiet and dry. The wind whispers softly through broken columns. There's a mosaic underfoot, half buried, showing a man holding a scroll. His face is calm, his gaze serene. You brush away the dust, and the colors glint briefly before fading back into dullness. Everything beautiful in this world seems to flicker. You wonder how many times people have felt this same grief, that ache of seeing knowledge disappear. In Alexandria, in Baghdad, in Nanjing, in countless monasteries raided or abandoned. And yet, somehow, enough always survives. Fragments, copies, echoes. Memory has a way of hiding from extinction, of tucking itself into unlikely corners. You find yourself standing beside a cracked amphora filled with what look like pebbles. When you reach inside, you realize they're small, rolled-up scrolls turned to stone, the papyrus carbonized by heat. They're unreadable now, fused shut, but you can feel the weight of words within them. The ultimate locked file. Somewhere in those ashen cylinders might be an unknown poem, a forgotten theory, the diary of a man who once thought his words would live forever. In a way, they did. They just changed form. The rain stops. The air grows still. You can hear the distant cry of a bird, maybe a hawk circling the ruins. The sound is sharp, lonely, and echoing. You start to walk again, past the last remnants of walls and shelves and into the open desert. The stars are bright now, diamond sharp against black. You tilt your head back and imagine every one of them as a lost library, each carrying a fragment of something remembered. In the quiet, a thought comes to you. Maybe no knowledge is ever truly lost, just misplaced. The universe keeps backups in unexpected places, in memory, in myth,
in the words that survive on someone's lips.
You glance down at the sand, and something catches your eye. A small, broken tablet half buried in dust. You kneel to brush it off. The symbols are faint but recognizable. Cuneiform again, the same wedges you saw in Uruk and Nineveh. You realize this piece has been carried here by time, by trade, by chance. Even after destruction, fragments wander, spreading the memory of what once was. You slip it gently back into the sand. Some things are meant to rest. The wind shifts, brushing your face with cool air. The fires are long gone now, and so is the panic. In its place, a kind of peace. The understanding that everything burns, but not everything disappears. Somewhere, 1,000 miles away, another library will rise. New shelves, new scribes, new stories. Maybe the next one will last longer, maybe not. But it doesn't matter, not really. What matters is that someone, somewhere, will always try again. You take one last look at the ruins, their edges softened by starlight. Smoke still curls faintly from the stones, carrying the scent of clay, ink, and old dreams. You breathe it in, the perfume of lost knowledge, and let it settle. The night is quiet now, the world holding its breath between forgetting and remembering. The smoke clears, and you find yourself walking up a stony hillside under the pale light of dawn. The air smells faintly of olive trees and dust, and somewhere nearby, a rooster announces another day that feels older than civilization itself. You blink, and the landscape sharpens into the familiar shapes of whitewashed walls and marble columns. The horizon trembles with heat, and beyond it, the sea flashes like hammered silver. You've arrived in ancient Greece, a place where curiosity itself seems to have been born with a sunburn. You follow a narrow path that winds toward the Acropolis. Your sandals scrape against stone, polished smooth by centuries of footsteps. Each echo feels like it carries a question, one that's been bouncing around since the dawn of thought. How do we keep what we know from vanishing? The answer, in Greece at least, started small. Forget grand libraries for now. In this world, knowledge isn't kept behind guarded gates. It's traded in courtyards, tucked into scrolls kept on wooden racks, and sometimes just remembered by heart. The earliest Greek libraries weren't public at all. They were private collections owned by philosophers, poets, and the occasional rich guy who liked to show off how cultured he was. You find yourself standing outside one of these homes, a shaded courtyard, vines creeping along stone walls, and a man sitting cross-legged, writing with a stylus on a wax tablet. He doesn't look up. He's deep in thought, probably composing something immortal, or possibly just his grocery list. It's hard to tell with philosophers. You step closer and glance around. There are scrolls stacked on a wooden shelf, their ends labeled with little clay tags. The air smells faintly of beeswax and olive oil. This humble room is what passes for a library here in 5th century BCE Athens. No marble halls, no statues of sphinxes, just thought and quiet persistence. The mainstream historical fact here: the Greeks were among the first to treat books, or rather scrolls, as things worth collecting systematically. By the 5th century BCE, philosophers like Aristotle, Plato, and their contemporaries maintained private libraries that would later inspire the great public collections of the Hellenistic age. Aristotle's library, especially, became legendary. It's said his scrolls later ended up in the hands of the kings of Pergamon, influencing how the world would come to think about organizing knowledge. You linger beside Aristotle's imagined study, a calm, shaded room filled with the soft rustle of papyrus. You can almost hear the scratching of styluses, the murmured debate of students, the crackle of a nearby oil lamp. Someone's arguing about the nature of reality. Another insists numbers hold the secrets of the cosmos. You want to interrupt and ask where they keep the snacks, but it doesn't seem like the right moment. Still, it's strangely comforting. This idea that even in their chaos, These thinkers built the scaffolding for modern learning. Their libraries weren't just shelves of scrolls, they were mental ecosystems. Every scroll carried not just words, but the echo of conversation. Students, teachers, friends, rivals. The texts lived because they were read, debated, and reinterpreted endlessly. You step outside again. The sunlight's harsh now, the kind that bleaches marble until it glows. Down in the agora, traders are shouting, goats are bleating, and a poet is dramatically reciting something that may or may not rhyme. You weave through the noise toward a quiet corner where a small wooden stall leans against a wall. Inside, a man offers scrolls for sale. His beard's enormous, his patience, not so much. He grumbles as you browse. You unroll a scroll at random. It's a fragment of Homer, maybe, or something pretending to be. The script is careful, steady. Each letter feels alive. You imagine some wealthy patron buying this, tucking it into his private library, and feeling wiser just by owning it. Some things, apparently, never change. Here's your quirky tidbit. Scroll merchants in ancient Greece often sold their goods used, with little regard for the author or origin. Plutarch once complained that you could buy philosophical works mislabeled or forged by opportunistic sellers. Essentially, ancient Athens had the first second-hand bookstore scam, where you might walk away with authentic works of Pythagoras that were really just recipes and doodles. You chuckle, rolling the scroll back up and set it down carefully. The merchant grunts approvingly, probably relieved you didn't steal anything. You stroll back toward the shade, the city's hum softening around you. You pause at the foot of the Acropolis, staring up at its crown, the Parthenon gleaming against the sky. Somewhere inside those marble temples, priests and scholars are preserving hymns, rituals, and calendars. Not in shelves, but in song and repetition. Oral tradition still reigns here. The Greeks, for all their writing, trust memory more than material. Historians still argue whether the Greeks truly valued written preservation as much as we imagine. Some suggest that Plato himself distrusted writing, believing it made minds lazy, that once you write something down, you stop truly knowing it. He preferred live dialogue, the spark of spoken reason. Others argue that his skepticism was rhetorical, that he secretly adored the permanence of words, even as he scolded them. Either way, the tension remains. Does writing protect memory or replace it? You climb the last steps to the Acropolis, your breath slow and steady. From here, you can see the Aegean glittering, the world stretching outward, a map of future minds. Somewhere beyond that horizon, Alexandria will rise, Pergamum will compete, and Rome will copy them both. But for now, this is enough. One hillside, one city, and a few dozen men and women dreaming of truth. You wander among the ruins, hearing the faint clink of chisels shaping marble and the low hum of bees drifting through thyme bushes. The sound of civilization at work, art, philosophy, argument, and fatigue. You find a shady spot by a column base and sit. Someone nearby is reciting a poem about heroes and fate, his voice lazy and musical. A scribe beside him is jotting it down, preserving it in ink. You smile. Somewhere down the line, that habit, the act of writing what's worth keeping, will birth libraries grander than any temple. You think again about that early Greek attitude toward books, private, personal, almost sacred. It wasn't about public access, it was about intimacy. To own a scroll was to hold part of the cosmos in your hands, or at least that's how they like to think of it. The wind shifts, carrying the smell of salt and thyme. You close your eyes. For a moment, it feels timeless. The quiet rustle of papyrus, the faint hum of thought, the steady pulse of sunlight on marble. Civilization, preserved in ink and memory. When you open your eyes again, you notice a stray scrap of papyrus tumbling past your foot. It's half burned, a corner only, with 2 letters still visible. You reach down,
Catch it gently and smooth it against your palm. The texture is fragile, like dry leaf veins. It doesn't matter what it says, the meaning is already gone. What matters is that someone once cared enough to write it.
You let it go, and the breeze takes it. Maybe it'll drift into the sea, maybe it'll crumble into dust. Either way, it joins the long story of words that refuse to stay still. You rise, stretching, and take one last look at the city below. Sunlight bouncing off rooftops, laughter in the distance, 1,000 tiny lives unfolding around ideas. You smile, thinking that the first real libraries weren't built of stone or wood, but of conversation, curiosity, and a stubborn refusal to stop asking why. And as you start your slow descent back down the hill, the world feels quieter, fuller somehow, as if the stones themselves have been whispering to you all along. The light changes as you descend the hill, softer now, honey gold and drifting. The air thickens with salt and sea breeze, and before you realize it, centuries have slipped by again. You blink, and the noise of Athens fades into the hush of waves and gulls. The world has moved forward. Ships with tall sails dot the harbor below, their hulls painted in bright ochre and green. A city sprawls around it, gleaming under the Mediterranean sun. Alexandria. You stand at the edge of a marble causeway that smells faintly of salt and parchment. The horizon shimmers, and for a moment, the sea itself seems to hum with thought. Somewhere behind you, scholars argue over Aristotle, scribes shuffle through endless scrolls, and someone drops a stylus with a clatter that echoes like the starting pistol of human curiosity. You've arrived at the Great Library, the dream made real, the world's first true cathedral of knowledge. You walk forward slowly, feeling the marble cool beneath your bare feet. The entrance looms ahead, towering columns, carved lintels, and wide bronze doors that glint like captured sunlight. Above them, an inscription once read something like, "The place of the cure of the soul." Not bad for a building that mostly smells of ink and damp papyrus. Inside, the light softens further, filtering through narrow windows. The air is thick with dust, resin, and the faintly sweet aroma of scrolls, tens of thousands of them. The rustle is constant, like wind through dry leaves. Rows upon rows, cases upon cases, each holding what might as well be the entire known world. You walk slowly, careful not to disturb the silence. Here's the mainstream historical fact. The Library of Alexandria, founded around the 3rd century BCE under the rule of Ptolemy I, or perhaps his son, was the largest and most ambitious collection of knowledge the ancient world ever attempted. Its goal? To gather every text from every land in every language. Ships entering the harbor were searched and their scrolls confiscated, copied, and, depending on who you ask, sometimes never returned. The original manuscripts went to the library. The owners got the duplicates. Ancient piracy, but for books. You imagine it now, sailors groaning as officials rummage through their cargo, pulling out bundles of scrolls wrapped in cloth. One man protests that he needs his navigation charts, but the official just smiles and says, "You'll get them back soon." Spoiler, he won't.
You wander deeper into the labyrinth. The sound of scribes working is hypnotic. The faint scratching of reeds on papyrus, the murmur of translators comparing texts in Egyptian, Greek, Hebrew, and Persian. One room smells faintly of cedar, where scrolls are hung to dry. Another is cooler, lined with jars of honey and vinegar used in early preservation experiments. A cat whines between your legs, purring. It looks smug, and why not? Cats were sacred here. Maybe this one thinks it's guarding the universe's secrets.
You pause before a shelf stacked high with scrolls labeled Homer, various versions. Various versions indeed. Historians still argue whether Homer was one man or a brand name for a collective of bards. Imagine trying to organize that catalog. No Dewey Decimal System, just hope and handwriting? The library scholars weren't just collectors. They were editors, translators, and debaters. They tried to fix texts, compare sources, and settle disputes about authenticity, and probably created entirely new arguments in the process. It's said that scholars like Xenodotus, Callimachus, and Eratosthenes worked here, the latter being the man who calculated the circumference of the Earth using 2 sticks, 1 shadow, and an unreasonable amount of math confidence. You pass a group of scribes hunched over a table, arguing about punctuation. One insists on a dot above the line, another below. The third says, maybe no dots at all. You smile. The eternal editor's war, alive and well. Here's your quirky tidbit. The librarians of Alexandria supposedly invented the concept of metadata. Callimachus's Pinakis, or tables, were essentially the first card catalog in history, listing authors, subjects, and brief summaries. Imagine someone painstakingly writing out a handwritten Wikipedia, one scroll at a time. Somewhere, a scribe sighs deeply, realizing he'll be doing this forever. You wander through a high hall where sunlight pours in from slits in the ceiling, illuminating floating dust motes like tiny galaxies. The sound of water trickles nearby, a fountain gurgling softly, keeping the air humid enough that papyrus won't crack. Scholars move through the aisles like ghosts, murmuring, gesturing, arguing in low tones. You catch snippets. Herodotus exaggerates. No, that's a different Plato. Stop sneezing on the Aristotle shelf. There's something deeply peaceful here and deeply human. Every scroll, every argument, every correction is a small act of defiance against oblivion. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just a building. It was a promise that the world could remember itself. Of course, nothing this grand escapes drama. You catch sight of a scroll tucked high on a shelf, edges singed, labeled simply, "On the Burning." The irony stings. Historians still argue whether the Great Library burned once, several times, or mostly just fell into decay. Julius Caesar gets the usual blame. During his campaign in 48 BCE, he allegedly set fire to ships in the harbor, and the flames spread inland. Others say later conflicts, Christian purges, Roman rule, Arab conquests, chipped away piece by piece until nothing remained. Whatever the cause, you can almost feel that future smoke in the air. The stillness carries a tremor, as though even the walls suspect they won't last. It's a strange melancholy, knowing that so much brilliance once stood right here, only to vanish into rumor and memory. You pause beside a desk where a scholar is dozing, his head resting on a half-translated text. You smile, proof that even geniuses hit the afternoon slump. You glance down at his scroll. It's a medical treatise from India, written centuries before. The ink glows brown and faint, the script winding like vines. Alexandria didn't just preserve Greek thought, it absorbed the world. Persian astronomy, Egyptian rituals, Babylonian mathematics, Indian medicine. Knowledge flowed here like trade goods. The scholar stirs, mumbling in his sleep about ratios and remedies. You gently roll the scroll closed, place it beside him, and move on. In another chamber, astronomers debate over maps of the stars, their ink-stained fingers pointing to dots on parchment. They whisper theories about invisible worlds and the motion of the sun. You can almost hear Eratosthenes laughing softly from somewhere, muttering, "Told you so." Outside, the evening light turns amber. The sea glimmers through the colonnades. The world feels balanced, for now, as if humanity has found its heartbeat in paper and ink. You stop before the great doorway again, looking back one last time. The air smells faintly of cedar and candle wax, the eternal perfume of ideas. You think of how fragile it all is, how everything humans build eventually falls to time, and yet how much survives anyway. Maybe that's what makes it beautiful.
Every burned scroll leaves a shadow on the next one written. Every lost library becomes a myth that inspires a new one. Even Alexandria, in its eventual silence, planted the seed for all who came after. Pergamon, Rome, Baghdad, even the digital archives of today. You step into the golden dusk. The city hums softly behind you, alive with the murmur of readers. Somewhere, a ship's horn echoes over the water. You take one last deep breath, tasting salt and ink on the air, and smile. The Library of Alexandria may someday fall, but for this moment, this shimmering, fragile moment, the whole world's wisdom fits under one roof, and you are standing in its light. The golden light of Alexandria fades, and as you blink, the air shifts, thinner, cooler, with a faint tang of animal hide, the scent of parchment. The wind carries the smell of sea and hillside herbs, and the sound of gulls dissolves into the caw of ravens circling above limestone cliffs. You're no longer in Egypt. The world tilts northward, to a place where ambition met rivalry and necessity gave birth to invention. You've arrived in Pergamon. The city climbs the slope like a stairway to heaven, terraces of stone and marble, temples glinting like pearls against the sky. You walk up a broad path lined with olive trees, each one twisting like it's been thinking for a very long time. By the time you reach the top, the view stretches forever. The Aegean Sea to the west, the plains of Anatolia rolling away beneath you, and at the crest, the great library of Pergamon, shimmering in the morning light. It's smaller than Alexandria, but in a way prouder. A rival not just in size, but in spirit. You step through its portico, where statues of poets and philosophers stand like sentinels. Inside, the air feels alive with quiet competition. The librarians here are scholars, collectors, and maybe just a bit obsessed with one-upping their southern neighbors. You walk slowly past rows of shelves, each filled with scrolls rolled tight and bound in colored ribbons. The walls are decorated with geometric frescoes, stylized designs that almost hum in the light. You notice immediately that the scrolls smell different. Less of papyrus, more of something faintly musky, organic. It's parchment, treated animal skin, smooth and pale, a material that feels strangely modern beneath your fingertips. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Library of Pergamon, founded during the reign of Eumenes II in the 2nd century BCE, became one of the greatest repositories of knowledge in the ancient world. When Egypt supposedly embargoed papyrus exports to slow Pergamon's growth, the scholars here developed parchment, Pergamena Charta, a tougher, reusable, and longer-lasting writing medium. Rivalry created innovation, and the very name of the city lived on in the word parchment. You lift a sheet carefully. It's smooth, slightly translucent, the faint pores of the animal skin still visible. There's something haunting about it. The way life becomes memory, flesh becomes story. The ink glides easily across the surface, and unlike papyrus, this doesn't crack or crumble. You can roll it, fold it, even erase it if you're patient enough. The librarians must have been thrilled or horrified at how many old scrolls could now be recycled. The thought makes you smile. You picture a scribe muttering as he scrapes off a previous text. Sorry, Aristotle, we needed the space. You wander deeper into the hall. A scholar sits cross-legged on a mat, sorting scrolls by color-coded tags. Another hums quietly as he sharpens a reed pen. The light filters through thin fabric curtains, turning the air golden. Someone nearby is lecturing on medicine, tracing diagrams of veins and organs onto parchment sheets. The faint metallic tang of ink fills the air. At one end of the hall, a young apprentice reads aloud to an audience of drowsy scribes. His voice trembles as he recites a passage about the movements of the stars. You pause to listen. The words sound ancient and fresh all at once. Knowledge here isn't static, it's alive, shared through rhythm and repetition, like a chant that keeps the mind awake even as the body tires. And yet, beneath the scholarly calm, you can feel a current of rivalry. Pergamum and Alexandria are in a quiet arms race, not of weapons, but of words. Each wants to hold the largest library, the best scholars, the most prestige. It's both noble and absurd, like two kids arguing over who has more homework.
Historians still argue whether Egypt's papyrus embargo actually happened or if it's just a neat story invented later to explain parchment's popularity. Some believe parchment was already in use, simply refined here to perfection. Others suggest the embargo tale was ancient propaganda, a way for Pergamum to flex its cleverness. Either way, necessity or myth, the result changed history. Writing finally found a material that could survive centuries of mishandling.
You step into a smaller chamber where the walls are lined not with scrolls, but with bound sheets stacked flat, early experiments in codex form. You trace a finger over one of them and feel the promise of the future. The transition from scroll to bound book starts quietly here, like the first whisper of a revolution no one yet notices. A scribe looks up from his work and smiles faintly. "It's easier to find the page you need," he says, half joking, half prophetic. You nod. He's right, and he doesn't even know how right.
Here's your quirky tidbit. Parchment was so durable that some scribes reused old sheets by scraping off the ink, creating what modern historians call palimpsests. Centuries later, scientists would use ultraviolet light to read the ghostly layers beneath, discovering hidden works of ancient mathematics and philosophy that had literally been overwritten by prayers. Even history's erasures, it seems, refuse to be quiet. The day drifts on. Outside, the air buzzes with cicadas, their rhythm slow and hypnotic. Inside, the hum of scholarship continues, pens scratching, scrolls unrolling, quiet laughter between weary copyists. You wander past a small balcony that overlooks the valley below. From here, the world looks peaceful, sunlit fields, winding rivers, the faint shimmer of distant sea. For a moment, you understand why these people devoted their lives to preservation. The world is fragile, but words are their way of holding it still. You rest your elbows on the balcony's cool stone railing. A breeze rises, carrying the smell of time and ink. Down below in a courtyard, a group of students sits in a circle, reciting fragments of Homer from memory. Their voices rise and fall, overlapping softly. It sounds like the sea. You close your eyes, letting it wash over you. When you open them again, the light has shifted. The scholars are gone, replaced by shadows. You walk back inside, past empty desks and shelves that glow faintly in the dying light. For a moment, you catch sight of a spider weaving its web between two scroll racks. Delicate, persistent, perfect geometry. It seems fitting. The web, too, is a library of sorts, threads storing vibration, meaning, and memory. You crouch and watch as it finishes one perfect spiral, then settles in the center, waiting. The library around you hums in silence, filled with its own invisible web, one connecting parchment, thought, and time. As you rise, your steps echo softly in the vast hall. Somewhere, a night guard lights an oil lamp. The flame flickers across the marble floor, reflecting in the polished bronze plates that line the walls. You think again about rivalry, how even competition, when driven by curiosity, can become a force of creation. Without Alexandria's shadow, Pergamon might never have reached for greatness. Without jealousy, perhaps no parchment. Without parchment, no codices. Without codices, maybe no books at all. You reach the doorway, the air cool against your face. Below, the city of Pergamon glows with scattered lamplight, like constellations scattered across the hillside. You breathe deeply, the smell of ink, parchment, and summer earth mingling in your lungs. Behind you,
The great library settles into its nightly hush. The scrolls shift faintly in their cases, parchment creaking like old wood. You imagine the words within them, poetry, geometry, philosophy, murmuring to one another as the lamps dim. You smile softly and whisper to no one, "Keep talking."
Then you step out into the night. The stars above Pergamum are bright and sharp, each one a tiny point of unwritten knowledge, each one waiting to be found, copied, or maybe just quietly admired. The wind tugs at your cloak. The city sleeps. The library dreams, and you begin your descent. Parchment rustling faintly in your memory like the heartbeat of history itself. The night air of Pergamon fades as you take one more step forward. The stars above you blur, and the sound of crickets is replaced by the deep, echoing hum of wind through sandstone. The temperature drops, the air turns dry, and the scent of the sea is replaced by dust and resin. When the world comes back into focus, you're standing beneath the shadow of massive stone walls, cracked and worn by centuries. You've arrived in Nineveh, once the beating heart of the Assyrian Empire. The city lies along the Tigris River, its ruins spread wide beneath a sky so pale it looks almost white. You walk slowly through the remnants of ancient streets. The ground beneath your feet feels brittle, scattered with broken tiles and pottery shards. Everything around you whispers of grandeur that refused to die quietly. And then, like a mirage rising from the dust, you see it, a long rectangular building with stone reliefs etched along its facade. Winged bulls with human faces guard its entrance, their expressions unreadable, eternal. You pass between them, and suddenly the world becomes quiet. Inside, the air feels older than language itself. This is the Library of Ashurbanipal, the world's oldest known royal library. Ashurbanipal, king of Assyria in the 7th century BCE, was not content with ruling an empire. He wanted to know everything about it. While other kings built palaces and monuments, Ashurbanipal built a library. Thousands upon thousands of clay tablets were collected, cataloged, and stored right here. Every wall you see once held rows of shelves filled not with scrolls, but small rectangular blocks of baked clay, each one etched with neat wedge-shaped cuneiform script. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Library of Ashurbanipal contained over 30,000 tablets, covering topics from medicine and astronomy to law and literature, including the famous Epic of Gilgamesh. It was, in many ways, humanity's first serious attempt to gather and preserve knowledge on a grand scale. You reach for one of the tablets on a low shelf. It's cool to the touch, heavier than you expect. The surface is packed with tiny impressions, lines, and triangles. Cuneiform script, the written language of Mesopotamia. Each symbol pressed carefully into wet clay thousands of years ago. Each one representing a sound, a thought, a trace of someone's mind. As you tilt it toward the light, shadows gather in the grooves, and the words seem to come alive. You can almost hear the scribe muttering as he worked, probably annoyed at his reed stylus drying out in the heat. You imagine him blowing on it, dipping it back in ink, and continuing his endless copying. Maybe he yawned. Maybe he dreamt of doing anything else. You walk deeper into the room. The shelves rise higher now, packed tight with tablets of every shape and color. Some neatly labeled, others chipped or cracked. The walls are lined with clay envelopes, small cases that once protected important texts. Many bear royal seals pressed deep into the surface. One tablet catches your eye. It's inscribed with a familiar shape, a series of wavy lines like water. When you squint, you realize it's a flood story. It's Gilgamesh, or at least one of its early versions, the first great literary epic. You can almost hear the rhythm of the words, the journey of a hero searching for immortality. The irony isn't lost on you.
Even the first great story ever told was, at its core, about preserving memory. The fear of forgetting is as old as civilization itself.
You move along the rows, tracing the grooves on the stone shelves. Each room leads to another and another until the library feels like a maze, a labyrinth built not to confuse, but to preserve. The air is filled with the faint echo of your own footsteps, like whispers bouncing between the walls. And then you notice something strange. Several tablets seem to have been recopied, the same text appearing over and over. A clay redundancy system, perhaps? Or maybe ancient obsession with accuracy. You smile. Even then, people feared losing data. Only difference, their backup system was made of mud.
To store and organize the vast number of tablets, Ashurbanipal's librarians actually developed an early version of the cataloging system, a kind of call number written on each tablet's edge. Some even had inscriptions like, "Property of Ashurbanipal, King of the World." Talk about labeling your stuff. You stop at a table where a scribe once sat. A broken stylus rests there still, as if he simply got up and never came back. You picture him mid-sentence, maybe interrupted by a messenger, or perhaps by the sudden roar of war outside the gates. Because that's how history works. The moment you think you've captured it, it slips through your fingers.
Historians still argue whether the library was deliberately burned or caught in the crossfire when Nineveh fell to invading forces in 612 BCE. Ironically, the fire that destroyed the city also preserved much of its knowledge. The clay tablets, once soft, were hardened by the flames, baked into permanence. Destruction became salvation. You can almost hear the universe chuckling at its own dark sense of humor. You wander into another chamber, smaller, quieter. The walls are decorated with reliefs showing Ashurbanipal himself seated on a throne, reading a tablet. The expression on his face isn't pride, but curiosity. It's almost tender. A king who wanted to read more than rule. How rare that must have been. You imagine him here, pacing between shelves, muttering to aides. Find me the omen texts about eclipses, and bring me the one on horse breeding. The man collected knowledge like treasures. He even had scribes sent across his empire to copy texts from Babylon, Sumer, and beyond. An ancient interlibrary loan system. As the evening light softens, the shadows of the reliefs grow longer. You sit for a moment on a stone bench, the air cool against your skin. You run a thumb across a cracked tablet beside you, feeling the faint indentation of symbols, the ghost of thought pressed into clay. It's humbling to think how fragile all of this once was. A single scribe's mistake, a misplaced tablet, a flood or a war, and entire ideas could vanish. And yet, some didn't. Some survived. Against all odds, across thousands of years, they whisper still. You smile to yourself. Maybe that's what humans are best at, whispering loudly enough that even time can't quite silence us. Outside, the light fades entirely. You step into the doorway once more, looking back at the silent shelves. In the darkness, they almost resemble a modern server room. Rows of tablets instead of hard drives, but the purpose is the same. Storage, access, control. Maybe humanity hasn't changed all that much. We just upgraded the material. As you turn to leave, you glance back one last time. The winged bulls at the entrance seem to be watching you go. Their eyes catch the faint moonlight. You bow your head slightly in respect. For the scribes, for the dreamers, for the mud and the fire that somehow outlasted kingdoms. And then you walk out into the night. The stars are enormous here, hanging low and ancient. You can almost feel them flicker like the glow of oil lamps in some faraway library. The wind moves across the ruins, rustling dry grass and broken pottery. It sounds like pages turning. You breathe deeply, letting the cool desert air fill your lungs. Somewhere, across time, you can still hear the scratching of styluses against clay,
the quiet determination of people who refuse to let knowledge die. You start walking again, leaving Nineveh behind, but not its lessons. The ground crunches beneath your feet, each step echoing softly, like punctuation marks on an unfinished story.
Because really, that's what every library is. Not a monument to what we've known, but a promise that we'll keep trying to know more, even if all we have to write with is dust. The cool desert air lingers on your skin as you take another step forward. The ruins of Nineveh dissolve behind you, replaced by a softer sound, the rhythmic slap of water against wood. A faint scent of salt and smoke rides the air. When you blink, you're no longer surrounded by dust and stone, but by a bustling port. Ships bob gently at the docks, their sails pale as bone beneath the Mediterranean sun. You've come to the island city of Rhodes, crossroads of trade, philosophy, and, as it happens, books. Rhodes is radiant. The sea flashes like liquid glass, and gulls circle lazily overhead. You make your way through narrow marble streets lined with workshops, perfumed stalls, and bronzesmiths hammering their craft. The island hums with the chatter of merchants and travelers. But you aren't here for the market. You're here for a place most people today have forgotten, a library built for sailors, thinkers, and wanderers alike. The Library of Rhodes was smaller than the giants of Alexandria or Pergamon, but it thrived as a practical hub for learning, a crossroads between cultures. You wander through a shaded courtyard filled with columns and flowering vines. The smell of sea salt mixes with papyrus, ink, and a touch of olive oil. The librarians here wear plain tunics, their fingers ink-stained and their hair bleached by the sun. They greet you with quiet nods, as if they already know you've come to read. Here's your mainstream historical fact. During the Hellenistic period, Rhodes became a major intellectual center, home to philosophers, astronomers, and engineers, including the famed Stoic school founded by Zeno's followers. The island's library, though modest compared to its rivals, served scholars who came from all corners of the world to study navigation, mathematics, and rhetoric. You take a seat at a long wooden table beneath an open skylight. Sunlight pours in, dust motes swirling like golden fish in water. A scribe passes you a scroll. It smells faintly of sea air and lamp oil. When you unroll it, the text inside isn't philosophy or poetry, but something more practical. Charts of stars and constellations. Maps for sailors who navigate not by compass, but by memory and starlight. The librarian smiles knowingly. Books for travelers, he says. His voice is quiet, calm. Knowledge isn't just for kings and priests. It's for anyone trying to find their way home. You like that? You trace a line of ink across the parchment. A star map, the ancient kind sailors used to cross the sea at night. You picture them on deck, whispering the names of constellations to the rhythm of the waves. Orion, Argo, the Pleiades. The sky as both story and instruction manual. One scribe leans across the table and says, "We copy every chart twice. One for the library, one for the fleet. Paper sails, we call them." You can't help but grin at that. Paper sails, a poetic phrase for something so practical. It fits perfectly here, in a place where poetry and pragmatism blend like salt in the wind. Here's your quirky tidbit, with one of the earliest recorded attempts to use mirrors to reflect sunlight as a signal, possibly even as a defensive weapon. Some accounts claim the great inventor Archimedes once experimented with burning mirrors here, focusing sunlight to ignite ships. Historians mostly roll their eyes at that one, but it's fun to imagine. A library doubling as a weapons lab, scholars brandishing scrolls and mirrors like ancient lasers. You wander through the colonnades, where scrolls are stored in small clay jars to keep out the sea damp. A young apprentice hums softly as he polishes a set of brass instruments, astrolabes, armillary spheres, and a strange gear-filled object that looks like a small puzzle box. You stop to look closer. It's the Antikythera mechanism, or something very much like it. A device used to predict celestial movements, eclipses, and perhaps even festivals. It's a wonder of gears and craftsmanship so advanced that for centuries no one believed it could have been made in the ancient world. You run your finger over its delicate metal teeth and feel the precision. Historians still argue whether such machines were common or if this was a one-of-a-kind marvel, a lost technology that appeared, shone for a moment, and then disappeared again. Either way, it proves something profound. Knowledge wasn't just being preserved here, it was being engineered. You step outside for a moment to breathe in the sea air. The docks are alive with movement. Ships unloading scrolls, amphorae, and bundles of parchment from Egypt and Anatolia. You watch as porters carry crates into the library courtyard, each marked with careful inked symbols. Trade routes of the mind. Inside again, the library glows in the warm afternoon light. Scholars debate softly about the curvature of the earth, about whether the stars move or we do. A young philosopher paces the floor, speaking about virtue and tranquility, his audience nodding drowsily. You catch only fragments, but his tone is familiar, the kind of calm reasoning that might put you to sleep if you weren't already enchanted. You notice something about the rhythm of this place. It's not competitive like Pergamon, nor grand like Alexandria. Rhodes is more like a tide, steady, patient, cyclical. Knowledge flows in, knowledge flows out. Nothing here feels rushed or desperate. Maybe that's the secret. Preservation isn't always about hoarding. Sometimes it's about sharing, so ideas can travel and survive. A breeze moves through the courtyard, stirring the scrolls. One rolls off a shelf and lands near your feet. When you pick it up, you see that it's a collection of short poems, epigrams, written by sailors, dedicating voyages to gods and loved ones. You read one aloud quietly. "The sea takes much, but gives us the stars. May they guide our return when memory fails." You can't help but smile. Somewhere, a sleepy librarian murmurs, "Keep your voice down, the scrolls are listening." You chuckle softly. Fair enough. The day drifts on. Outside, the harbor begins to glow with sunset, the sky painted in copper and rose. The last rays of light spill through the open roof, touching the marble floor like a benediction. You imagine how many minds have passed through here. Sailors learning to navigate, poets scribbling verses between tides, scholars studying the geometry of waves. You sit quietly, listening to the waves beyond the walls. The sound blends with the faint rustle of parchment, the sighs of tired scribes. The rhythm of the ocean outside feels like breathing. You think about how fragile all this must have been. One good storm, one invasion, and it could all have washed away. But somehow, enough survived for us to know it was real. Enough to remember that even on small islands, people built great temples of thought. Before you leave, you glance one last time at the table of instruments. The gears, the charts, the shimmering lines of ink. So much care for accuracy, so much faith that knowledge could be mapped like the sky. You realize that every ancient library was a constellation in its own right, points of light across centuries, connected by the fragile thread of curiosity. You step outside, the evening breeze cool on your face. The sun dips below the sea, and the world turns gold, then violet, then blue. Lanterns flicker along the harbor. Somewhere behind you, a scribe hums a tune that sounds suspiciously like a lullaby. The stars begin to appear, one by one. You look up at them, remembering the chart from earlier, those old lines drawn across heaven. The same stars sailors once followed home, the same stars scholars once mapped on papyrus. And for a moment, standing there on the edge of the ancient sea, you feel what they must have felt, that every light in the sky is a word,
and every word is a way of finding your way through the dark. The evening haze of roads fades, and with a blink, the smell of salt and olive trees disappears. You're no longer near the sunlit Aegean. Instead, you feel damp stone beneath your fingertips and hear the faint drip of water echoing through a long, narrow corridor. The air smells faintly of smoke and wet clay. You've arrived in the heart of Baghdad during the 9th century CE, the golden age of the Islamic Caliphate, where the preservation of knowledge has reached an entirely new level. Before you, the House of Wisdom, Beit al-Hikmah, rises like a quiet fortress of intellect. Its walls are plain but sturdy, constructed of brick and plaster, with a subtle elegance that feels more intentional than flamboyant. Inside, scholars move deliberately, their robes whispering against the smooth floors, hands holding scrolls and codices that glimmer faintly under the soft glow of oil lamps. The atmosphere hums with concentrated thought, a calm and deliberate energy that wraps around you like a gentle tide. You walk slowly down a long hallway lined with low shelves, filled not with papyrus nor parchment, but both, carefully stacked and cataloged. Each scroll and codex is marked with inked labels denoting subject, origin, and author. The librarians here are meticulous, far beyond what Alexandria or Pergamum could have imagined. Their goal is preservation and accessibility. Knowledge is no longer just for kings or scholars, it's for anyone who seeks it. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The House of Wisdom, founded under Caliph Harun al-Rashid and reaching its peak under his son al-Mamun, became one of the greatest intellectual centers in history. Scholars from Persia, India, Greece, and beyond were brought together to translate, study, and expand upon works in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. You pause by a table where several translators are working together. A Greek manuscript lies open next to an Arabic translation, each line painstakingly compared for accuracy. One scholar points at a word and mutters, "Does it mean essence or form?" Another shakes his head and writes a note in the margin. It's painstaking work, but the air is calm, quiet, purposeful, like breathing. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some manuscripts that arrived from far-off lands were considered so valuable that they were literally chained to desks while being studied, a sort of medieval version of securing your Kindle against theft. You can't help but imagine a librarian muttering, "Please don't walk off with Aristotle again." You walk past a section dedicated to mathematics. Scrolls filled with equations and geometric diagrams, inked so meticulously it almost glows in the lamplight, rest beside codices with translations of Euclid, Ptolemy, and Indian mathematicians. You pick one up and trace your fingers over the elegant curves of a parabola, smooth and precise. A scholar glances at you briefly, eyes bright with quiet amusement, before returning to his work. Historians still argue whether the House of Wisdom truly centralized knowledge, or whether the fame it holds today is partly a legend, romanticized centuries later. Some evidence suggests smaller, specialized libraries existed in parallel across Baghdad, each with its own priorities. Yet the myth, or the reality, of Beit al-Hikmah resonates with the idea of a hub where ideas converged, languages intersected, and knowledge flowed freely. You move into a quieter chamber. The air is heavier here, tinged with the faint scent of camphor and ink. This is the medical section, where scholars study works by Galen, Hippocrates, and Indian surgeons. Codices are open on low tables, diagrams of human anatomy carefully inked in shades of brown and red. A young apprentice whispers softly to his mentor, pointing at the muscles of the arm. You lean closer, intrigued by the quiet devotion to detail, knowledge preserved not for prestige, but for human benefit. A translator nearby is working on an astronomical text. The parchment is filled with geometric tables and charts of planetary motion. You trace the lines with your finger, imagining ancient astronomers using these calculations to predict eclipses, tides, and celestial alignments. You feel that same pulse you felt before, the sense that preservation is also an act of hope. By recording the heavens, humans attempt to understand their place in the cosmos. Here's a subtle human touch. Scholars sometimes composed marginal notes filled with commentary, personal reflections, or even brief complaints. One note reads, "I wish the scribe would stop spilling ink on the diagrams. My eyes are tired." You chuckle softly. Even in grand institutions, humanity leaves its trace. Imperfection woven into the fabric of preserved thought. You wander into the translation room, where Greek, Sanskrit, and Syriac texts sit side by side with Arabic manuscripts. You can almost see the flow of knowledge. Scrolls arriving by caravan, translated painstakingly, recopied, and stored. One scholar leans over a table, gesturing excitedly. "If we interpret this correctly, it will correct Ptolemy's tables." Another shakes his head, murmuring about earlier errors in calculation. It's debate, discovery, and preservation all at once. A breeze enters through the lattice windows, carrying the faint scent of the Tigris. You glance outside briefly. The river glimmers like molten silver in the fading light, and the call to prayer echoes softly in the distance. You inhale deeply, feeling grounded in the calm of history, a place where curiosity and order intersect. You pause at a shelf where codices are stacked almost precariously. One bears an inscription noting its origin in India. Another is a Greek text on philosophy. You feel the weight of centuries pressing gently on your shoulders, the silent testimony of scribes who labored for decades so that knowledge would survive war, conquest, and decay. Historians still argue whether the House of Wisdom actually created knowledge or merely preserved and organized it. Some claim its greatest achievement was translating and transmitting earlier works. Others insist that new discoveries in mathematics, astronomy, and medicine emerged from the intense collaborative environment. Either way, the library demonstrates the power of human cooperation in preserving the past while shaping the future. You step into a final, quieter room. Scrolls and codices are stacked high, forming narrow aisles. The air smells of ink, resin, and worn parchment. You find a corner and sit on the cool stone floor, letting the hum of the library wash over you. Faint candlelight flickers across the shelves, casting shadows that dance like centuries-old ghosts. You breathe in, absorbing the stillness, the diligence, the sheer human persistence required to keep knowledge alive. Somewhere, a young scholar hums softly as he copies a medical text. The sound is soothing, rhythmic, almost musical. You close your eyes for a moment, imagining centuries of readers, scribes, students, and philosophers, all quietly performing the same acts, preserving, debating, copying, and caring. Knowledge is a river, and the House of Wisdom is a dam, carefully holding it, guiding it, and letting it flow where it needs to go. When you finally rise, the sun has completely set outside. Lanterns glow softly along the corridors, illuminating the manuscripts and scrolls in a gentle amber light. You glance back, feeling the weight of what has been preserved, the traces of so many hands, so many minds. The House of Wisdom was more than a library. It was a living network, a crossroads of culture, language, and intellect. It preserved the work of civilizations long gone and provided a foundation for discoveries yet to come. And standing here, in the quiet heart of Baghdad, you realize that preservation is as much an act of faith as it is of skill, a quiet promise that what is valuable will outlast the inevitable decay of time. You step back outside, the night warm against your face. The stars glitter above the Tigris, reflected faintly in the dark water below. Somewhere in the distance, a lantern flickers.
A scholar murmurs in a courtyard, copying a passage from Aristotle. You smile, knowing that this dedication across centuries, cultures, and empires is what allows humanity to remember, to dream, and to continue building. You take a deep breath, savoring the scent of ink, parchment, and earth. The world feels steady, ordered, and full of quiet resilience. And as you step away, leaving the house of wisdom behind, you carry the soft, persistent hum of knowledge with you, like a whisper echoing across time. The warm nights of Baghdad dissolve as you step through the veil of time, leaving behind the Tigris and the faint amber glow of lantern-lit corridors. The air changes again, drier, cooler, and faintly sweet with the scent of old wood and leather. You find yourself on the banks of the Loire River in medieval France. The world has shifted. Stone bridges arch over slow-moving water, and half-timbered houses lean slightly as if whispering secrets to one another. A thin fog hugs the streets, curling around your ankles, and you realize you've arrived in the cloistered quiet of a monastery. Monks move silently along cloistered walkways, their robes brushing against the stone. Their chants rise faintly from a distant chapel, echoing against the arched ceilings like wind in an empty cave. The place feels calm, deliberate, and protected, a sanctuary for thought, a fortress against forgetfulness. You follow a narrow corridor lined with shelves carved into the stone walls, each filled with bound codices, fragile parchment, and wooden tablets. Here's your mainstream historical fact. During the early Middle Ages, monasteries across Europe became centers for preserving knowledge, especially after the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. Monks copied classical texts, religious manuscripts, and practical treatises, ensuring that centuries of accumulated wisdom were not lost entirely to time. Without their dedication, much of antiquity's intellectual heritage might have vanished. You step into the scriptorium, the heart of the monastery's intellectual life. Light filters through narrow windows, dust motes floating lazily, illuminating rows of monks bent over desks, their quills scratching against parchment. Ink spills faintly on palms and sleeves. A young monk hums softly to himself as he copies a Latin text. Every motion is deliberate, careful, almost reverent. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some monks supposedly use their own tears or even the juice of certain berries as ink when supplies ran low. It makes you smile imagining a scribe pausing mid-letter, tasting a drop of purple to see if it would work. Necessity, after all, breeds invention, and sometimes a touch of melancholy. You notice the methodical rhythm of the work. Quill meets parchment, letters formed with meticulous care. Pages stacked for drying, then bound. Margins are filled with commentary, corrections, or personal notes, occasional jokes, philosophical musings, and even small doodles of monks dozing in their robes. You lean closer to one page and see an illuminated initial, a miniature garden of gold leaf and color. Hiding in the corner, a tiny fox chasing a hare. Humor and art entwined with devotion. Historians still argue whether monasteries prioritized religious texts over classical knowledge, or whether they actively sought to preserve pagan writings alongside scripture. Some evidence shows that texts by Cicero, Virgil, and Aristotle were copied and studied alongside theological treatises, suggesting that medieval Europe maintained a more nuanced intellectual culture than popular imagination allows. You wander down a dim aisle where codices lie stacked like silent sentinels. The smell of aged parchment is almost sweet, a blend of animal skin, ink, and the faint musk of centuries. Some codices are bound in leather, others in simple vellum, edges worn smooth by countless hands. You trace the spine of one thick volume and marvel at the labor invested. Each letter painstakingly inscribed, each page carefully turned, each thought preserved for posterity. A monk walks past carrying a basket of freshly written pages.
You notice his hands are stained with ink, his robe dusted with parchment fibers. He pauses to adjust a sheet, murmuring, "May this find its reader in time." You smile softly. In this moment, the act of writing feels sacred, not for fame, but for survival. The library isn't just a collection, it's a promise to the future. You find yourself drawn to a window overlooking the cloister garden. The air smells of wet earth and budding flowers. You imagine the monks sitting here for moments of reflection, letting their minds wander between copying texts and contemplating creation. Their work is repetitive, perhaps monotonous, yet imbued with meaning. Every letter copied is a bridge across centuries, connecting them to the scribes of Alexandria, Pergamum, and Baghdad.
One is a medical shelf holding the oldest manuscripts. One is a medical text translated from Arabic into Latin, another a mathematical treatise. You feel the quiet thrill of human persistence, the way knowledge migrates, adapts, and survives across languages, lands, and time. Each tablet, each codex is a lifeline. Here's another quirky detail. In some monasteries, the monks used chains to secure valuable manuscripts to their desks, the origin of the chained library. You imagine a monk sighing as he stretches the chain across a thick folio, grumbling, "If only the book would read itself." Even in the quietest sanctuaries, the human touch, impatience, humor, and practicality leaves its mark. You move to the library's back room, where illuminated texts glow softly in candlelight. The colors are muted but beautiful, depicting saints, mythical creatures, and occasionally a small dragon curled in the margin. Every scroll and codex tells multiple stories: the content, the scribe's hand, and the artful decoration. You run a finger along the edge of a page, feeling the slight ridges of ink and gold leaf. The rhythm of the monastery is slow but purposeful. Meals are taken in silence, prayers are recited, and every copied text is treated as both a sacred duty and an intellectual act. You sense a calm that's almost tangible, the peace of a space designed not for productivity in the modern sense, but for longevity. Each manuscript is a seed planted for the distant future. You wander the cloister one last time. The stone arches cast elongated shadows, and the evening light slips through narrow windows. Somewhere, a bell tolls, and the sound reverberates through the quiet halls. You pause, imagining the centuries of hands that have passed along these paths, each one carrying ink, quills, and devotion. Finally, you step outside, breathing the crisp air of the Loire Valley. The sun is low, painting the half-timbered houses in amber and rose. You look back at the monastery, a silent guardian of knowledge, feeling the hum of centuries vibrating through its walls. The monks' labor has kept human thought alive, bridging the chasm between the collapse of empires and the dawn of the modern world. And as you walk along the riverbank, the faint smell of parchment and ink still clinging to your clothes, you understand something profound. Preservation is more than cataloging and copying. It is patience, care, and a quiet determination to whisper across centuries. In every library, monastery, and scriptorium you visited, that whisper persists, gentle yet unyielding, carrying human thought forward into the unknown. You pause for a moment, looking at the river's slow reflection of twilight stars. You breathe deeply, letting the serenity sink into your bones. The manuscripts, the codices, the scribes' labor, all remind you that knowledge survives because humans care, not because it is easy or glamorous. The path ahead is quiet, the night air cool, and the world, for now, feels safe in the hands of those who remember. The mist of the Loire drifts away as you step forward, and the faint scent of ink and vellum gives way to a cool metallic tang.
You find yourself in Florence, Italy, in the early 15th century, a city waking to the light of the Renaissance. The streets are cobbled, narrow, and filled with the distant clatter of horse hooves and cartwheels. The scent of bread baking in ovens mingles with the aroma of freshly cut wood and wet stone. You follow a quiet alley, almost hidden behind bustling markets, and arrive at a building that seems modest but holds a remarkable secret: the Medici Library. You enter a small vestibule, and the world shifts into soft lamplight and the faint rustle of parchment. The air carries the scent of polished wood, wax, and ink, mixed with the faint tang of iron from quill nibs. Here, knowledge is no longer purely for preservation. It is being actively studied, questioned, and expanded. Scholars, translators, and scribes move quietly, their robes brushing against the floor, their voices soft but deliberate. Here's your mainstream historical fact. During the Renaissance, the Medici family in Florence became major patrons of the arts and scholarship, establishing libraries that collected manuscripts from across Europe, including classical Greek and Roman works. These libraries not only preserved texts, but also promoted humanist learning, bridging the gap between medieval scholasticism and modern inquiry. You wander past tall shelves filled with bound codices, each spine decorated with intricate gold lettering and the occasional fleur-de-lis. The manuscripts vary in size and material: vellum, parchment, and the early imported paper from the Islamic world. A scholar sits at a desk, leaning over a translation of Aristotle, comparing it carefully to a Latin version. You notice the faint glow of candlelight reflecting on the ink and the careful way he erases errors with a knife. No drop of knowledge left unexamined. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Renaissance scholars reportedly kept bees in small rooftop hives so they could harvest wax for sealing letters and manuscripts. Imagine a monk or a scholar leaning over a manuscript while a bee buzzes lazily around his candle. Efficiency meets unpredictability in a buzzing little symphony. You move into a room devoted to classical texts. Scrolls have long been replaced by bound books, yet the pages retain the faint curve of older manuscripts, a gentle nod to history. A young apprentice copies diagrams from Ptolemy's Almagest, translating symbols into marginal notes in Italian. The sound of quill on paper is rhythmic, almost meditative, blending with the faint rustle of pages and occasional cough. Historians still argue whether the Medici libraries were primarily political tools or genuine intellectual endeavors. Some suggest the collections were meant to signal prestige and power, attracting scholars to Florence to demonstrate the family's cultural dominance. Others maintain that the Medici's patronage genuinely advanced the preservation and dissemination of knowledge, allowing rare manuscripts to survive wars and fires. Likely, it was both. Human motives are rarely simple. You wander toward a small alcove where illuminated manuscripts glow faintly in the dim light. You run a finger along a gold-embellished border, feeling the careful layering of ink and pigment. The artistry is delicate, almost otherworldly. Some pages feature tiny landscapes or architectural drawings tucked into the margins, while others depict allegorical figures in swirling robes. You smile, imagining a scholar decades ago whispering to himself, "This will outlast our city if nothing else." A young scholar nearby is experimenting with a recent invention, the printing press. He aligns movable type, sets the letters in ink, and presses a sheet of paper. The impression comes out slightly uneven, the letters imperfect but legible. You can almost feel the excitement in the room, the knowledge that this machine could amplify the preservation of thought far beyond the labor of a single scribe. You step outside for a moment, breathing in the crisp Florentine air. The Arno River glimmers in the fading sunlight, and the stone bridges cast elongated reflections across the water. You notice artists painting along the riverbank, scholars debating quietly on benches,
merchants closing up shops. The city is alive, vibrant, and aware of its own history.
Returning inside, you pass a scholar who is poring over a translated Arabic text of Ibn Sina's Canon of Medicine. The pages are dense with marginal notes and diagrams, reflecting a continuum of knowledge spanning continents and centuries. You feel a sense of awe, realizing how connected all these ancient libraries have been. From Pergamon to Baghdad, from monastic cloisters to Florence. Each a link in a chain stretching across time and space.
A subtle human touch catches your attention. Scribes sometimes added tiny doodles or jokes in margins, as if the act of preservation needed a whisper of playfulness. One codex shows a small monk chasing a pig, inked so lightly you almost miss it. You chuckle softly, imagining centuries from now, someone noticing it and wondering about the humor of a long-dead scribe.
The library's main hall is quiet, but you feel the accumulated energy of decades, if not centuries, of diligent work. Every page, every note, every correction, they are the echoes of countless minds striving to ensure that the wisdom of the past is not lost. You realize that preservation is not just about copying. It is about layering, annotating, interpreting, and occasionally arguing.
You pause near a shelf where classical Greek texts rest. Some are copies brought from Constantinople after the fall of the Byzantine Empire, delicate and fragile. You handle one carefully, marveling at the precision of each letter, the way centuries of care have kept it legible. Every word is a bridge to a mind long gone, every page a whisper across the centuries. The sunlight outside softens into evening, casting warm gold tones across the room. You feel the rhythm of Florence, quiet, contemplative, alive with curiosity. Scholars murmur, quills scratch, and the scent of ink and old paper fills the air. You lean back against a polished wooden desk, feeling a deep connection to the past, the continuity of human effort, and the quiet triumph of preservation. Finally, you step outside again, taking in the twilight city. The river mirrors the last light of the day, the bells of the cathedral toll softly in the distance, and the streets begin to empty. The library stands as a beacon, a quiet testament to centuries of curiosity and care. You realize that Florence, in its golden age, is more than just a city. It is a living testament to the resilience of knowledge and a reminder that preservation is a constant, delicate act of faith. You take a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the evening settle into your bones. The whispers of scribes, scholars, and translators from centuries past linger in your mind, blending with the quiet beauty of the city. You walk along the Arno one last time, carrying with you the soft, persistent hum of human thought, ready to continue the journey through time. The fading light of Florence disappears behind you, and the faint scent of ink and polished wood gives way to something warmer, the smell of paper, smoke, and oil lamps. You find yourself in Paris, late 17th century, the city alive with whispers of revolution, coffee houses, and intellectual debate. Cobblestone streets glisten from a recent rain, reflecting the flicker of lanterns. You follow a narrow alley that winds through quiet courtyards, and there, tucked between tall townhouses, stands the Bibliothèque Mazarine, France's first public library. You step inside, and the world shifts into a hushed symphony of quiet footfalls and rustling pages. The air is filled with the faint, comforting scent of old books, polished wood, and beeswax from the candle sconces. Scholars and students sit at long tables, quills scratching softly against paper. The energy here is deliberate but understated, a kind of intellectual heartbeat. You take a deep breath, letting the quiet settle around you, absorbing the atmosphere of meticulous scholarship. Here's your mainstream historical fact.
The Bibliothèque Mazarine, founded by Cardinal Mazarin in the mid-17th century, was one of the first libraries in France to open its doors to the public. Its collection included manuscripts from across Europe, rare printed books, and classical texts rescued from monasteries and private collections. It became a hub for learning, debate, and the exchange of ideas, bridging the gap between private knowledge and public access. You walk slowly down a wide hall lined with tall shelves. Bound volumes of vellum and early paper sit shoulder to shoulder, spines gleaming faintly under the flickering candlelight. A scholar leans over a table, carefully comparing two editions of a legal text, murmuring softly to himself. You notice that the meticulous organization here allows even the most fragile manuscripts to survive decades, if not centuries. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some librarians of the era reportedly used the squeaks of mice in the stacks as a kind of natural alarm system. If the rodents moved too loudly, it could indicate that someone had entered the library after hours. You can't help but imagine a nocturnal library chase involving tiny, uninvited visitors. You move into a reading room where students and scholars pore over texts in every subject imaginable: astronomy, mathematics, law, theology, literature. A young mathematician traces diagrams in the margin of a geometry text, chalking faint lines onto a separate slate for calculations. A poet murmurs verses from a Renaissance manuscript, her voice blending softly with the scratch of quills. The room is alive, yet quiet, like a carefully conducted orchestra. Historians still argue whether public libraries truly democratized knowledge or whether access was effectively limited to the educated elite. Some claim the Mazarines' openness was symbolic, a gesture to demonstrate Enlightenment ideals rather than genuine accessibility. Others argue that even limited public access planted the seeds for broader intellectual growth, influencing later generations of thinkers. Either way, the library represents a shift. Knowledge is no longer solely the domain of monasteries, private collectors, or royal courts. You wander to a small alcove where rare manuscripts are stored behind glass. One is a Latin translation of Euclid, its diagrams precise and elegant. Another is a handwritten copy of a medieval herbal, with delicate illustrations of plants and flowers in muted greens and golds. You run your fingers lightly along the edge of a codex, feeling the soft give of the vellum, imagining the care required to produce such precise copies before the advent of widespread printing. Nearby, a scholar is experimenting with a recently acquired invention, a magnifying glass. He studies the tiny lettering, murmuring, "Ah, now I see what the scribe intended." You smile, realizing that tools for preservation are evolving alongside the texts themselves, not just copying words, but enhancing the human ability to read, understand, and safeguard them. You move into a section devoted to correspondence and historical records. Boxes of letters, legal documents, and diaries are carefully cataloged and tied with ribbon. Each contains fragments of personal lives, political intrigue, or scientific observation. You run your hands over a bundle of letters from a Parisian alchemist, the ink faded but legible. Even centuries later, the personality of the writer breathes through the text: impatience, excitement, curiosity, and occasional frustration. Historians still argue about the balance between preservation and accessibility. Was it better to protect manuscripts behind glass and limit exposure, or to encourage active use and study, risking damage? In this quiet library, the tension is palpable. Shelves carefully cataloged, yet scholars allowed to handle texts with respect. It's a compromise between safeguarding the past and keeping it alive. You wander past a reading desk where a philosopher leans over a collection of Greek and Roman texts, annotating furiously in the margins. The careful layering of notes demonstrates centuries of intellectual dialogue, the scribes and translators of the past conversing with those of the present.
You trace your fingers along a faded inscription, imagining the scholar's thought process. The questions asked and answered in whispers, in ink, across generations.
Here's a subtle, human touch in the margins, expressing surprise, joy, or confusion. One reads, "I cannot believe how clever this calculation is. I must try it myself." You chuckle softly. Even in the grand project of preservation, the human mind remains playful, curious, and occasionally prone to delight.
You pause near a window that overlooks the quiet courtyard. The scent of rain-soaked stone and blossoming flowers drifts in. The library, you realize, is not just a place for storing books. It is a living organism. Each scholar, each reader, each careful hand contributes to the heartbeat of the collection. Preservation is not merely about protecting objects. It is about nurturing thought, curiosity, and imagination. You wander toward the grand hall, where rare manuscripts are displayed for study. A young student opens a medieval codex carefully, revealing illuminated letters that shine like jewels. The images depict biblical scenes, mythological creatures, and architectural sketches, each a miniature work of art. You imagine the time, patience, and care required to produce such meticulous work, and you feel a quiet awe for the generations of hands that have kept these treasures intact. As the evening deepens, lanterns flicker, and the city quiets outside. The library hums softly with the gentle rhythm of study, the turning of pages, the scratch of quills. You pause to absorb the atmosphere, letting the centuries of effort sink into your bones. Preservation, you realize, is as much about care and attention as it is about time and material. Finally, you step outside. The rain has stopped, leaving cobblestones glistening under the soft moonlight. Paris sleeps, but the Mazarine Library remains awake, a beacon of human diligence and curiosity. You breathe deeply, inhaling the scent of old paper and the faint aroma of candle wax, feeling connected to the lineage of scholars who dedicated their lives to the same quiet mission, to keep knowledge alive. You walk along the River Seine, the gentle lapping of water beneath the bridges accompanying your thoughts. The whispers of past librarians, scribes, and scholars linger in your mind, reminding you that preservation is never a solitary act. It is a chain of care, curiosity, and persistence stretching across centuries. And as you step further into the night, the Bibliothèque Mazarine behind you glows softly in your memory, a quiet testament to the enduring power of knowledge, carefully tended and lovingly preserved. The quiet streets of Paris fade behind you, replaced by the low hum of a distant train of thought, a gentle murmur that carries you forward. You find yourself back in a modern, familiar space, yet not quite. It's a library, yes, but not confined to walls of stone or brick. A mental landscape stretching across centuries and continents, where every whisper of paper, every scratch of quill, and every flicker of candlelight exists simultaneously. You wander slowly, feeling the weight of history pressing gently against your shoulders, aware that all these ancient, medieval, and early modern libraries exist together in this infinite, quiet continuum. Think of it as the grand repository of human curiosity, where clay tablets from Nineveh sit beside vellum manuscripts from a French cloister, and star charts from Rhodes hover next to the codices of Florence. It's vast, orderly, yet soft around the edges, a space that seems designed to let you breathe. You trudge along aisles of memory, running your fingers over the intangible spines of ideas. Each step is deliberate, slow, a conscious act of honoring those who labored to preserve what we might otherwise have lost. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The notion of a library, a physical and intellectual space dedicated to collecting, organizing, and safeguarding knowledge, has evolved but remains remarkably consistent in purpose. From the mud tablets of Mesopotamia to the carefully chained codices in Renaissance Europe, the goal has always been to ensure that human thought survives the passage of time. You pause in front of an aisle that seems older than time itself. Clay tablets glow faintly in your mind's eye. Inked margins of medieval manuscripts shimmer with gold leaf. Early printed books hum softly. It is overwhelming in the most calming way. Your fingers hover over a projection of the Antikythera mechanism, the tiny gear spinning just enough to remind you that knowledge often takes tangible, mechanical form as well. In some ancient libraries, cats were allowed to wander freely, keeping rodents away from the precious scrolls. You can almost hear a cat mewing softly among the shelves, brushing against a monk's robe, then settling atop a pile of manuscripts. Even in the most austere centers of knowledge, life and humor found a way in. Historians still argue about the relative importance of different libraries in shaping modern thought. Was it the Library of Alexandria, the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, or the monastic scriptoria that most influenced contemporary science and philosophy? There's no definitive answer, and perhaps that's the point. Knowledge is cumulative, a collaborative effort across time, space, and culture, impossible to trace to a single origin. You continue walking, and as you do, the air feels softer, the lights dimmer, the shadows longer. You notice the faint echo of voices, scribes, scholars, and readers from every era, their murmurings overlapping like an intricate, soothing symphony. You catch fragments of Latin, Arabic, Greek, French, and Italian, but each language blends into a melody of purpose, preservation, understanding, and connection. The vastness of this library feels infinite, yet you are not lost. Instead, you are embraced. You pause at a virtual reading desk, run your hands over the smooth, imagined surfaces of manuscripts, and feel the rhythm of centuries beneath your fingertips. Every annotation, every marginal note, every carefully drawn diagram is a testament to human persistence. Knowledge survived famine, war, fire, and flood because someone cared enough to copy it, store it, or protect it. You take a slow breath and walk toward a quiet alcove where ideas linger like light trapped in glass. You imagine the faint scratch of quills on paper, the murmur of monks in cloisters, the hum of scholars debating in Baghdad, the quiet tapping of movable type in Florence. The rhythm of these acts is almost musical, a cadence meant to soothe and reassure. The world remembers, knowledge endures. Here's another subtle human touch. Some scribes included personal prayers in margins, small reminders to themselves or future readers to care for the text and its message. These whispers of humanity, tiny as they may be, survive alongside grand ideas, grounding them in reality. You imagine reading one such note centuries later, and the connection feels profound, as if the scribe is speaking directly to you. You wander to an area where modern libraries would eventually emerge. Open spaces, chairs arranged in quiet circles, communal tables for discussion. You can almost see them evolving, influenced by every library you visited in this journey. Nineveh, Pergamon, Rhodes, Baghdad, Florence, Paris. Each contributes a piece to the puzzle, each a stepping stone to the libraries and archives we now take for granted. The pace slows even further. You notice the faintest flicker of light, softer than candle, more gentle than sunlight. Time itself seems to stretch, and you become aware of the quiet satisfaction that comes from simply being here, surrounded by the careful labor of countless hands across centuries. Knowledge preserved is hope preserved. Curiosity safeguarded is humanity safeguarded. You pause in the center of this imagined hall and close your eyes. You see the clay tablets, the scrolls, the codices, the early printed books, and the soft glow of lamplight over centuries of study. You feel the pulse of human diligence,
the quiet devotion to truth, understanding, and the subtle joy of discovery. Each act of preservation, each careful hand, each whispered annotation is a heartbeat of civilization itself. Finally, the glow softens into twilight. You sit quietly, letting the infinite continuum of libraries settle around you like a warm blanket. The centuries hum in gentle unison, the whispers fade into a soft lullaby, and your mind relaxes, floating among the shelves, the manuscripts, the tools, and the scribes. Preservation is no longer just a concept. It is a presence, a calm, enduring force that carries humanity's knowledge into the future. You breathe slowly, deeply, letting the imagined scent of parchment, ink, and candle wax fill your senses. The hum of history settles into a gentle rhythm, almost like the soft heartbeat of the universe itself. You feel the quiet triumph of human effort, small acts of devotion that together create something eternal. And as your eyes begin to drift, the infinite shelves of knowledge blur softly into the warm embrace of night. The manuscripts, the clay tablets, the scrolls, the marginal notes, and the illuminated pages all whisper a final promise. Knowledge survives, care endures, and human curiosity will always find a way to reach across time. Slowly, the glow fades. The whispers quiet. The shelves melt into shadows. The world contracts gently around you. You feel the serenity of centuries pressing softly against your mind, a soothing reassurance that the labor of the past is still here, still alive, and still guiding you forward. Now you take one final deep breath, letting every lesson, every word, every preserved thought settle into your bones. The air feels cooler, the shadows softer, and the world quiet. You are part of this continuum now, the last note in an endless lullaby of human curiosity and care. The night stretches gently around you, soft and deep, carrying the faint sense of parchment, wax, and ink. You lie back, or perhaps remain seated, letting the quiet of centuries settle into your mind. Each whisper of pages turning, each faint echo of quills scratching, blends into a slow, rhythmic hum that soothes the edges of thought. You imagine the countless hands that have touched these manuscripts, scribes, monks, scholars, and translators, all contributing their small, quiet devotion to the survival of ideas. The vastness of human knowledge feels both immense and intimate, like standing on a quiet shore where the tide is slow and deliberate. Waves of history lap gently, carrying fragments of thought, theory, and story across centuries, ensuring that what matters is not lost. The libraries of Nineveh, Rhodes, Baghdad, Florence, and Paris merge in your mind, forming a single, continuous corridor of care and curiosity, stretching infinitely yet warmly embracing you. You feel the tension in your body dissolve as the rhythm of preservation, study, and quiet devotion flows over you. Each breath mirrors the slow turning of pages. Each heartbeat echoes the centuries of thought carefully preserved by countless human hands. The world contracts, softens, and hums with quiet reassurance. You are safe in the embrace of knowledge, cradled by the diligence of those who came before. Let your eyelids grow heavy. Let the whispers of the past carry you toward sleep, slow and steady. Know that every word ever written, every page ever copied, every thought ever preserved continues to exist, and that you are part of this living, enduring chain.
drift now, gently, into dreams. The libraries watch over you, the centuries whisper softly, and the night carries you forward on the hum of human curiosity and care. End of script. Sweet dreams.